Hi everyone, and welcome to this recording of my presentation on Awesome Admin to Application Architect and beyond. I want to start this recording with a few thank yous. Firstly, thank you to the organisers of French Touch Dreaming, which was the first event at which I was able to present this talk. And I also want to thank the London Admin User Group and my company Mavens, because together they co-hosted an event in London all around this theme of Admin to Architect, and there I was able to present this to the community for a second time. Now finally, the biggest thank you is to members of both of those communities who wanted to make either the French Touch Dreaming or the admin group talk, but couldn't do so because it was those people that requested that I make a recording. So this recording is for and inspired by those people. Okay, so what are we here to talk about today? Well, it's the journey from Awesome Admin to Application Architect. And for me, this is quite a personal presentation. This is a journey I've been on myself in the last few years. I've been working on the Salesforce platform for about 7 years, and around 5 of those years I was an admin. I wouldn't go so far as to say I was an awesome one, but I was an admin. And more recently, I've moved into the world of consulting and to architecture. And I've transitioned not just occupationally, but also in terms of my learning and some of the certifications I've been picking up as well. So this talk is basically a summary of that journey, and it's targeted at anyone that's considering doing the same. So here we're going to cover what the application architect track is, and more importantly, why it is relevant for us admins. And we're going to begin today by telling a story. So let's meet our admin. Now, this is an accidental admin, like so many of us. She did not choose Salesforce, she did not seek it out. It was put on her desk and told, here you go, you own this now. So our admin had to learn Salesforce, and the more she learned, the more she liked it. The more she liked it, the more she wanted to learn. So before long, our admin felt that she's ready to take the first step in her certification journey. And she got her administrator cert. And as you can see, she's delighted with that, and so she should be, because that is in itself quite an achievement. But things don't stand still. So as time moved on, she kept learning, she kept liking, she kept learning, and ultimately she thought maybe it was time for her to have a look at some of the other certifications that were out there. And that excitement didn't last long, because then she got confused. So this might be something that you're familiar with, because when you decide to move on from your first cert and look at what else is out there, there's a wealth of options you can explore. So maybe our admin thinks she wants to concentrate on being a pure admin and go down the awesome admin route and move on to looking at the advanced administrator cert. Alternatively, maybe she's more interested in the platform side. So in the old days, she could have looked at the force.com developer. Now it would be the platform app builder. Or she may see herself as more of a business analyst, moving into more of the consulting side and looking at things like the Sales Cloud consultant or the Service Cloud consultant. Or maybe she doesn't want to stay that broad. Maybe she wants to develop into a speciality, which these days could be anything from Marketing Cloud and Pardot through to Community Cloud, or even something like Field Service Lightning. So she's confused. She doesn't know which of these roads to go down. Now, I would love to tell you that this presentation today will give you the answer. The truth is that I'm going to make this admin's life more difficult, and maybe your own life more difficult, because I'm going to introduce to you yet another option. And that option is the Salesforce Architect Journey. Now, the Architect program in the world of Salesforce isn't new, and the Architect program has always been there for you to prove that you know the platform inside and out. So what is new, and what we're going to be discussing today, is that there's now 3 tiers of the Architect certification, and 3 tiers to this track. We start off with specializations, the lowest level of this pyramid that you can see marked specializations with a purple and a green area. Now, in each specialization, there is a designer exam, and we're going to cover the 4 designer exams marked in purple on the left. Once you've ticked off all of those, the mandatory specializations, you qualify as a domain architect, either an application architect, which is what we'll cover today, or a system architect. And there's no exam for those. Automatically, you'll get that accreditation when you meet the prerequisite exams. And then right at the top, the pinnacle of this track is the CTA, the Certified Technical Architect, right at the top of that pyramid. And that's gained through a review board. So the key thing really with this track now is that you can go as high and as wide as you like on this pyramid. Today though, we're going to concentrate most of our time on that application architect track because that's most relevant for those of us that come from an admin or a functional background. So what is an application architect? Let's look at those 4 prerequisite exams that allow us to call ourselves an application architect. They are the platform app builder, the sharing and visibility designer, the data architecture and management designer, and platform developer 1. So those are the 4 exams that the application architect consists of, but let's look at it now a little closer. So if you're coming at this from an admin background, you might immediately be put off by that word architect. Please don't. Basically, this is what Salesforce say that an application architect is, and it's someone with a deep understanding of native Salesforce features and functionality, the ability to model a role hierarchy, data model, and configure those appropriate sharing mechanisms. And maybe that sounds familiar to you, because basically that's what an admin or a functional person does. They use these core features, they know their way around them already. So this track is really not as scary as you may at first think for an admin or a functional person. But just because you could in theory do it doesn't mean that you should. So let's talk a little bit now about that. And you may be saying to yourself, well, I'm an admin, I'm not an architect. I don't design or build applications, I maintain one, a single one of them. So why should I care about this track? And I would counter that with a few reasons. The first is this, that you do design and build your application. Every time you decide on a data type for a field or a new relationship, that is design. Every time you create a new workflow rule or build a new process, that is building. So you might as well learn how to build the system right. Even if you truly do have the easiest admin job in the world and you are simply maintaining one single existing system, then it's much easier to maintain a system if you know that it's structurally sound and built on solid foundations. This track will help you learn that and be sure. Next is this, you're an admin today, but maybe not tomorrow, and this is certainly the journey that I took from admin to consultant to architect. So try and plan ahead for the rest of your career as well. This one is probably if I'm honest, the reason that I went down this path, which is learning for learning's sake. It's nice to get new knowledge, it's nice to learn new things, and the certificates are kind of cool too. And that leads me on to this, which is this quote, because it's there. Now, you may know this quote. If you don't, this was the response given by the mountaineer George Mallory when asked why he wanted to climb Mount Everest, because it's there. And I'm sure you can see, there's a bit of a similarity between this architect pyramid we're climbing and a mountain. So if you can do it and you have the resources to tackle it, then why not try? Why not go out there and stretch yourself? So if I have convinced you that we're going to go and climb this mountain together, then how do we do it? Well, the best way to climb a mountain is one step at a time. So here's what we'll be doing in this talk. We'll talk through each of the 4 exams that you need to get you to that application architect base camp. And for each of them, we'll run through some of the new things that you'll need to learn, maybe some things that you haven't come across in previous exams or in your day-to-day job. We'll also look at some of the key things that you need to know for each exam, where most of the questions focus their attention. And those 2 things are not always the same, by the way. You might need to learn some new things, but the core of the exam might still be elements that you already know pretty well. And for each exam, I'll give you my personal take on an awesome admin difficulty rating, basically how easy or how tricky that each exam is for someone that has an admin background. But there comes a massive warning there, which is that is, of course, incredibly subjective. It will come down to your current knowledge, your preparation for the exam, the style of questions that you deal with best, and even the luck of the draw on which questions appear in the exam. So each time I deliver this talk, people come up to me with different backgrounds and they tell me that my ratings will way off for their personal experience, and that's fine. For some backgrounds, the ratings that I give will be almost the complete opposite of what you may find. It is only a guide, and you're very, very welcome to ignore those ratings. Okay, let's move on with our first exam. And our first exam is Platform App Builder. So let's start by looking at this. A description of how Salesforce position this exam, which is that this is really targeted at people with experience designing, building, and implementing custom applications declaratively. And in a way, this is similar to the description of the application architect track as a whole. This is us. This is what we're already doing. So really, it shouldn't be that scary. Let's look at some of the new things that you learn along the way in preparation for this exam. Maybe there's some things that you didn't cover in admin or you didn't cover in the old developer exam. So here they are. So starting with Lightning components, you do not need to know how to build them, but simply what they are, where you can use them, and when they might prove useful, what the benefits of these components are. The mobile application section is really around branding and configuring the navigation on the mobile app and how you can use quick actions to give your users access to commonly used functionalities very quickly. And then that point around application development is probably more scary than it needs to be. Basically, this just comes down to how do I best use my sandboxes? What kind of environment structure do I need to put in place in order to develop my applications in the right way? So some key things you'll need to know for this exam, and basically it all comes down to this. A large proportion of the questions you'll face in the Platform App Builder exam have this kind of format. They're all about what to use when. So for example, you're trying to build a new field that wants to achieve a certain purpose. What's the best data type for that? You want to relate two objects together. What's the right kind of relationship type to use? Basically, these are all about design decisions. Also things like automation. Which feature? Workflow, process builder, flow, triggers. What automation feature do you need to achieve a certain aim? It also extends to things like apps. When should you go to the App Exchange? What are good use cases for getting a third-party app installed? And also use cases for things like external objects. What are they? When should you use them? Now, the difficulty rating of this exam, if you've got admin already, if you had dev previously, this really shouldn't pose you too many problems. You should find that this is a nice gentle way into the application architect track. Okay, so let's move on. Our second exam is the Sharing and Visibility Designer. This is the first designer worded exam that we'll cover. And this is all around really making sure that you can design sound, scalable and performance solutions that meet sharing and visibility requirements. Now this idea of scalable and performant will come up in the next exam as well. So it isn't just this exam that covers those, but this one really focuses on that sharing and security and visibility side of things. So what you'll learn when you study for this exam, for me, is really falls down to boils down to these two things. One is that this will cover a lot of the sharing features you already know, but it will teach you how they work under the hood. We'll look at some examples of that in a moment. The second area that I think will really give you some new knowledge when you study for this is around how sharing works, not just as a regular user logged into a regular internal app, but how it functions in code and in communities, for example. So on the code side, the differences between code that's written with or without sharing. And on the community aspect, different community types have different ways of enforcing sharing. So proving that you know what those are and how to use them. Okay, let's look at some key things that you need to know for this exam. And really, it all comes down to making sure that you can architect your sharing in a way that is scalable and very, very efficient. So how do you make sure you build your system in a way that it's as efficient and secure for 10 million records as it is for just 10,000 records? So share tables and group membership tables, these are some examples of things that underpin those features that we already know well, maybe things like role hierarchy and public groups. As admins, we know how those things work in the setup menu, and this exam really teaches us the inner workings of some of those things under the hood. So for example, around share tables, group membership tables, you'll learn things like when they get recalculated, some of the potential performance issues that could come in. So a typical example is, I have 10 million records all owned by the same one admin user. I want to move that user to a new area of my role hierarchy. Is that a brilliant idea or is that a terrible idea? And if it's terrible, why? What could go wrong? You'll also learn a little about Apex Managed Sharing, what it is, when to use it, how it interacts with other sharing capabilities, and when those Apex sharing rules can get recalculated as well. Now, all of this combines to a slightly more difficult exam because there are some more technical things you need to learn, but this is not going to tax you all that much if you already have a good understanding of some of those core sharing features. As we said, it's really about layering information around how those features work under the hood. The features themselves you'll probably already know pretty well, and if you do, this won't cause too much of a problem for you. So our next exam is the Data Architecture and Management Designer. This one has a very similar description to the sharing exam that we just looked at. This is all about making sure you build performance solutions when you're faced with an enterprise scale level of data. So key things that you will learn in studying for this exam. It really comes down to this concept of LDV, large data volume. You'll learn what it means, what an LDV environment is, how to tell when you're in one, and what the considerations and the risks of being in an LDV environment are. Now, one of those big risks is that when you have millions and millions of records, it can take longer and it can be less efficient to query them. And by the way, query doesn't just mean in code. Things like reports, list views, even related lists are all examples of things that generate queries. So you'll learn a lot about how to make those queries more effective. For example, by using selective filters. You'd also learn about skinny tables and indexes and what the differences between those are. Also the differences between SOQL and SOSL. What does the query language do? What does the search language do? And which of them to use when? And really it all comes down to performance in this exam. How do you tune performance for large data volume imports, updates and exports? And part of that is learning a lot about the bulk API and things like whether to use it in serial or parallel mode and the magic of something weird and wonderful called PK chunking. So there's lots of techniques that you'll learn, and once you learn them, you'll have those available to you if you need them in the real world. You'll be able to put those into practice if and when your org scales up to becoming a large data volume environment. Now, these two things that I've listed under key things you'll need to know for the exam, these are not key because they take up most of the exam. Most of the exam is around that performance tuning stuff, around selective filters, skinny tables, etc., all the things that we've talked about. The reason that these two areas are listed under key exams is that they will appear on the exam to a small degree, but there isn't a lot of learning material out there on them. So these are two things, data quality and data governance strategies, master data management, that you'll want to try and find out what you can. There isn't a lot out there. Expect to see them on the exam and be prepared to know a little about them. So for example, what kind of roles should you have on a data governance team? Or here is a very simple example of an integration landscape. Which system should be the master data source? So the result to me is that this is a slightly more difficult exam than the sharing one, but only because the things you learn in your study is not the entirety of the exam. The extra difficulty really comes in because some of those things, data quality, data governance, master data management, will be on the exam even though you can't really prepare for them all that well. That said, most of those questions tend to be simple, tend to be common sense kind of answers. Put on your architect head and you'll get through those fine. Again, though, this rating is personal to me. Your mileage may well vary. Finally, Platform Developer 1. Now, I put this one last, and you can kind of see where I'm going in terms of the difficulty ratings, so you sort of know what to expect here. But let's start, as we do always, with the description. Now, I would argue with this description slightly, because Salesforce say you need knowledge, skills, and experience building custom, declarative, and programmatic applications. Now here's why I would query this description slightly. Personally, I do not have experience developing programmatic applications, but I passed the exam okay. I got through it okay. So I would question that. Obviously, you do need the knowledge and the skills around the core concepts. And that's probably the key thing that you learn when studying, is those core coding concepts, things like the model view controller paradigm, differences between variables and constants in code. One big area is knowing your way around triggers, classes, interfaces, and controllers, essentially which of them power which areas of the system. But it's not just about knowing how to write that code. You'll also need to know that you can handle errors gracefully and that you know best how to test and deploy that code as well. So some key areas that will come up on the exam. One is around knowing the patterns to process data efficiently, not putting DML inside a loop, for example. And most of the questions that I remember, certainly from my exam, will do this. They'll show you a small code snippet, and you'll be asked to read that code for efficiency or for security. So the examples could be, where is the problem in this code? This code is failing. On which line does the problem occur? Or this code snippet could introduce a security risk to your org. Tell us why that is. So all of those things combine for an admin to mean that this is probably one of the more difficult exams with someone of that functional background. However, it is possible, and there are some great resources out there that will allow you to prepare for this and really fill in the more technical coding gaps of knowledge that you may have. We'll talk about those resources in a moment, but the key thing I would say is do not think this exam requires you to write code. Reading code is what this is all about. And here's your reward then. Once you get those 4 exams, you qualify as an application architect. Congratulations! But this is my message to you. Why stop there? Because as we saw earlier, the application architect is not the top of the mountain. The top of the mountain is right the way up there. So once you've got your application architect, maybe you would consider going for the system architect track. Now this, as the description says, is really around some of the more technical features and factors like testing, governance and integration. And it is assessed through exams, just like the application architect track. There are 3 extra exams: development lifecycle and deployment designer, identity and access management designer, and integration architecture designer, plus the platform developer 1 that we already covered as part of our application architect. And then, of course, to truly say that you've scaled the mountain, we have our CTA, the Certified Technical Architect Accreditation. Now, this, put simply, is your ticket to the elite of the Salesforce world. And as we mentioned earlier, this is judged by a review board. So this is accreditation that actually you have to stand up in front of people and deliver. You have to talk through a solution that you've designed and that you've put an architecture in place for, and you have to be able to explain all of your design decisions. If you do that, congratulations, you've reached the top. You become a technical architect. Okay, so let's finish off with some resources that Salesforce provide us with, because they do want to help us reach the summit here. Firstly, a set of reference material, and probably the key one that will help you is what used to be called the Architect Academy. It's now moved on to the Salesforce certification site, so you can get it at the URL here. But this is a free library of self-directed resource guides for each exam. Now these give you some links to some really useful guides, videos, webinars and Trailhead modules. And talking of which, of course, there's a number of Trailhead badges that relate to the kind of topics that you'll see across all of these exams. And then there's also a group on the Trailblazer community which shares some exam guides and some sample scenarios. That's especially useful for those people that are looking to make the step up to the Certified Technical Architect level. And of course, the more exams you complete, the more certs you need to maintain each year, and therefore the more it costs for you to do so. Now this approach, the 3 then free arrangement, means that the maintenance cost is capped. Essentially, once you have paid to maintain 3 of your certifications, the rest of your renewals for that year are free. Okay, that's it. That's what I have for you. So thank you for listening. I definitely want to focus on this, which is that I hope most of you see now that this is not a particularly scary track for functional people. Yes, there are some new things that you need to learn, but that's going to be the same with any exam that you go for. So yes, this really is something for us admin folks as well. Now, thank you. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you again.